소리내어 따라 해보세요. 입에 익숙해져야 잘 들립니다.
Where is the book? Where is the book? Where are you going? Where are you going? Where do you usually shop? Where do you usually shop? Where did she buy that dress? Where did she buy that dress? Where is the best place to visit? Where is the best place to visit? Where are we going to have lunch? Where are we going to have lunch? Where do you live? Where do you live? Where can I find a taxi? Where can I find a taxi? Where is the nearest restaurant? Where is the nearest restaurant? Where did you buy that dress? Where did you buy that dress? Where are my keys? Where are my keys? Where is the bus stop? Where is the bus stop? Where do you work? Where do you work? Where is the bathroom? Where is the bathroom? Where can I get some coffee? Where can I get some coffee? Where is your friend? Where is your friend? Where are they planning to go? Where are they planning to go? Where do you want to eat? Where do you want to eat? Where does she keep her keys? Where does she keep her keys? Where are we supposed to go? Where are we supposed to go? Where did he go yesterday? Where did he go yesterday? Where are you going for vacation? Where are you going for vacation? Where does it hurt? Where does it hurt? Where are they staying? Where are they staying? Where are we meeting? Where are we meeting? Where is the train station? Where is the train station? Where can I buy a ticket? Where can I buy a ticket? Where is the park? Where is the park? Where do you want to eat? Where do you want to eat? Where is your house? Where is your house? Where can I find a good book? Where can I find a good book? Where is the nearest supermarket? Where is the nearest supermarket? Where did you put my phone? Where did you put my phone? Where are the children? Where are the children? Where is the meeting room? Where is the meeting room? Where can I park my car? Where can I park my car? Where is the nearest gas station? Where is the nearest gas station? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to go? Where is the library? Where is the library? Where is your school? Where is your school? Where did you learn English? Where did you learn English? Where did you pick up the word? Where did you pick up the word? Where does he work? Where does he work? Where are we meeting? Where are we meeting? Where did you find that book? Where did you find that book? Where is the nearest ATM? Where is the nearest ATM? Where can I get a map? Where can I get a map? Where is the exit? Where is the exit? Where do you keep your money? Where do you keep your money? Where is the concert? Where is the concert? Where is she going? Where is she going? Where are they now? Where are they now? Where do you live? Where do you live? Where can I find a restroom? Where can I find a restroom? Where is the nearest hotel? Where is the nearest hotel? Where do you want to travel? Where do you want to travel? Where is the nearest beach? Where is the nearest beach? Where can I buy groceries? Where can I buy groceries? Where is the art gallery? Where is the art gallery? Where do you go to school? Where do you go to school? Where is the nearest pharmacy? Where is the nearest pharmacy? Where can I find a good hotel? Where can I find a good hotel? Where is the nearest train station? Where is the nearest train station? Where do you want to study? Where do you want to study? Where is the nearest playground? Where is the nearest playground? Where can I find a good doctor? Where can I find a good doctor? Where is the nearest coffee shop? Where is the nearest coffee shop? Where do you keep your books? Where do you keep your books? Where is the nearest post office? Where is the nearest post office? Where can I find a good gym? Where can I find a good gym? Where is the nearest shopping mall? Where is the nearest shopping mall? Where do you want to go shopping? Where do you want to go shopping? Where is the nearest zoo? Where is the nearest zoo? Where can I find a good bakery? Where can I find a good bakery? Where is the nearest ice cream shop? Where is the nearest ice cream shop? Where do you want to have dinner? Where do you want to have dinner? Where is the nearest bank? Where is the nearest bank? Where can I find a good movie? Where can I find a good movie? Where is the nearest gym? Where is the nearest gym? Where do you want to go for vacation? Where do you want to go for vacation? Where is the nearest train? Where is the nearest train? Where can I find a good teacher? Where can I find a good teacher? Where is the nearest fire station? Where is the nearest fire station? Where do you want to go for lunch? Where do you want to go for lunch? Where is the nearest museum? Where is the nearest museum? Where can I find a good place to relax? Where can I find a good place to relax?
가장 가까운 동물원은 어디인가요?
Where is the nearest zoo?
미술관은 어디에 있나요?
Where is the art gallery?
지도를 어디서 받을 수 있나요?
Where can I get a map?
영어는 어디서 배웠나요?
Where did you learn English?
어디에서 먹고 싶나요?
Where do you want to eat?
어디에서 일하나요?
Where do you work?
너무너무 고생하셨습니다. 평안한 하루 되세요.